Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, and keep up with the currency war now breaking out across the world at Tarpley.net. There'll be a commentary from Russia Today on this very important issue, just coming into view as the International Monetary Fund meets in Washington, D.C., the World Bank, plus the other groups, right? They all take advantage of the time here. Notice we're back in 1931. I talked to you about this at the time of Greece and through the summer at the time of Ireland. Ireland, of course, in big trouble. Black Thursday last week for Ireland. But remember, it's the summer of 1931. The New York stock market crash is about a year and a half to 2 years in the past. So you've got a depression. The depression has started. The second wave of the depression is a European banking crisis. In those days, it started in Austria in May. It moved on to Germany in June and July, destroyed the banking system there. All of Eastern Europe also gone in the process. And then it hit the British Isles, it hit London and the British pound, the devaluation, the cessation of gold payment by the Bank of England, September 21st, 1931, the central date of the entire world economic depression, and most people have never heard of it. They know all about some stock market bubble in New York, but the destruction of the only world monetary system that there was in September 1931, and that was the pound. Now, what happened after that was this interesting process, competitive devaluation and beggar my neighbor. Those words were both coined to describe the policies of Ramsay MacDonald, the traitor, the guy who came into office with the votes of the Labour Party, but then dumped his own party and, acting as a good servant of the ruling financial elite in the city of London, became the figurehead frontman for a national unity government, meaning tremendous, brutal, drastic austerity. And that's how the British ruling elite went through the 1930s. It was this descendant of that government that began appeasing, in other words, supporting Hitler towards the end, towards the middle of the decade, 1936, and so forth. So Ramsay MacDonald wept over the international radio, urging people not to bring down the pound, right? Not to sell pounds. But as soon as he got finished weeping over the international radio, he began smiling broadly when he found that competitive devaluation, beggar your neighbor, a low pound, a weak pound, was a way for the British to export the depression. And to whom did they export it? In those days, they exported it directly to the U.S. And very soon after that, as Keynes wrote, the curse of Midas hit the United States, and a banking panic began in 1932 into 1933, and that's the banking panic that shut down every bank in the United States. That's the third wave. So we're still in the, what can we say, the latter phases of the second wave of the Depression. So this is what we have today, that competitive devaluations become a way to deal with the inherent pressures of the Depression. Remember, not holy smoot, not tariff policy per se, much more the destruction of the pound and then the competitive devaluations that followed. So let's look at the way it goes now as we find ourselves precisely in October 1931. Looks very much like October of 2010. So they're all talking about the risk of a currency war and the use of currencies as a policy weapon. And this is, of course, what they're all trying to do. Strauss-Kahn warns, this is Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the head of the International Monetary Fund, probable candidate for president of France. Strauss-Kahn says that governments are using currencies as a policy weapon. This is a very bad idea. He is against it, and he, above all, focuses on China. It's time for China to have a market-determined and flexible exchange rate. This is actually Geithner saying this. But if we look at the situation, the dollar is at these remarkable lows. We're at a 15-year low of the dollar compared to the yen. Now, the Japanese were worried when it was 83 yen to a dollar. This morning, Friday, the currency quotation I'm seeing right now is 81.86 yen to the dollar. So the yen is still at an all-time 15-year high, despite the interventions. It's simply showing that central bank intervention doesn't work well. You need capital controls and exchange controls to stop these hot money flows from destroying your currency and, above all, destroying your real economy. So the form that this takes is the peg of the Chinese renminbi to the dollar, which has been kept at about, 600 and, let's see, we have the quotations are here, and maybe this is not so important. The thing is that it was 683 in June, at the rate of 683 renminbi to a dollar, 6.83 renminbi to the dollar. That was back in June when Geithner launched his big attack on China and extorted the acquiescence of the Chinese to let the renminbi float upward, strengthen it a little bit. Right now, it seems to be about 6.67, so it's about 2% stronger. And the Anglo-Americans are screaming, "That's not enough! That's not enough! We want a massive upvaluing, a massive increase of value in the Chinese currency." Naturally, what that will do is tend to shift the depression out of the Anglo-American realm and into China. And that's more or less what the Chinese Prime Minister says. This is the crafty Wen Jiabao, right? The guy who vanquished the Anglo-Americans in Copenhagen last December. Wen Jiabao essentially was in Brussels this week, and there's a big interview in the Financial Times. Wen Jiabao says to the Anglo-Americans essentially, "Back off, boys. Don't pressurize China on the currency rate." And the reason he says Wen Jiabao, "We have many export companies that operate on a narrow margin of profit. If our currency goes up, our foreign prices go up, and our income therefore will go down, and our narrow margins of export profits will be wiped out. That will mean that our export factories will go into crisis. Those factories will have to shut down. We'll have many migrants returning to villages, and all kinds of political and social turbulence will result. That would be bad for the world." Now, Wen undoubtedly knows this is exactly what the Anglo-Americans want. Their goal is to shift the depression into China so that the Chinese pay for the depression and set up China for a color revolution. And we'll be back in just a minute.